I've seen probably 10 different scenarios that make that 4% rule probably not so much 4%.
All right, Mike Cravath. First of all, you just got married last weekend, so congratulations.
I did. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sure it was a fantastic time. I'm excited for you. And nothing comes out better than coming off of a high like that and go right into a discussion about retirement distributions, right?
Both equally as exciting.
in their own way.
Yeah.
In their own way. So you just, you're starting your life with somebody when you're getting married, but when you're taking a I'm not even going to try to make these things match up. They're totally different things. But for this conversation, we do want to talk about retirement distributions, talk a little bit about the 4% rule, because that's something you find on the internet. You hear it in our industry a lot, is 4%, taking 4% off of your investments, the magic number. But let's talk a little bit about just first in general retirement distributions and how important that is when somebody comes right out of their employer. They've been there for their whole life, or they're ending their career and they're moving into retirement and they're asking you, hey, Mike, how much can I safely take off of this and live on? And your answer is?
My answer now, I think, is probably different than what my answer would have been when I first got into doing this. I think
Okay.
Because there is that universally accepted, you just take 4% of your total net worth, and then you actually put those in distributions per month, and things are going to be fine, which in theory, it does work. But, as I've dealt with, upwards of probably 100 people that I've planned for and all the clients that I have, it usually doesn't work out to be that simple. There are different things that vary person to person that make that 4% a little less clear.
Sure. Yeah, it's a guide, right?
Yep.
And then then you start sitting as an advisor, you start setting in all these variables based on what that client is telling you, or maybe not telling you, but kind of leading toward, and then you make those adjustments, right? Like what kind of things would make you dial that number down or up?
Yeah. So usually, unfortunately, it's usually dialing it back down.
Yep.
There can be different things like, do you have any kind of large purchase you're going to plan for at some point in the future that's going to come off of your retirement assets? That could be a down payment for a home, a new tractor, it could be 100 different things. Or do you want to leave a large inheritance to somebody? Are you retiring before your Social Security age? Because at that point, maybe you can actually afford to take a little more than that 4% for a few years before you start drawing Social Security. So trying to figure out how many years that is before you draw, and then what's a reasonable rate more than 4% that you can take for a short amount of time before getting to Social Security, something that usually varies it too. I've seen probably 10 different scenarios that make that 4% rule probably not so much 4%. And I think that can kind of get confusing to people too, because most of the time when people come into a retirement meeting for the first time, they probably talk to somebody, whether it be a friend or a family member, and they might have talked specifics too. Well, my friend has, $500,000, we'll call it, and he's drawing this amount off of that. I should be able to do the same. And maybe that's true, but there are some different reasons that you might have going on personally. Some of the reasons that I probably just mentioned that might make it a little bit different.
Okay. So the distribution rate is set. I think the vibe I'm picking up here, right, is that no matter what you set the rate at on the onset, it's kind of has to be dynamic because life happens, right? We've seen that already. I might have a few more years in than you, more than I want to, right? But life happens to all of us, and I really don't care what age you are. If you're old enough to have some assets, that life throws you those curveballs. So what kind of adjustments do you make? How do you get dynamic when you dial it up, dial it down with people? What kind of events happen?
Yeah, so there's always going to be curveballs that life's going to throw at you, no matter what stage of life you're in, whether you're my age, I'm 32, or whether you're retired at 55 or 65, whatever that age is. it's important to always have a plan in place for the things that you do know. Some of those things that I mentioned, what if I want to travel every year? What if these things that I plan going into retirement, they're easier to kind of see coming, but there are also things you don't see coming. And that's why I think it's important to have a plan in place. But not only that, make sure you're reviewing that plan periodically too, to make sure that it's still on track and things are still the way they were when you first retired. Because the fact of the matter is throughout 20 or 30 years of retirement, your plan is going to look different than when you first made it, because there are so many different variables, not only in your life, but what goes on in the economy and the market too. So make sure you're kicking the tires on it every so often, and make sure that original plan is conservative too. You don't want to shoot too high early on and then ending up running out of money at some point. You want to make sure that you're shooting a bit lower in the beginning and making those adjustments up down the line if you could.
Yeah. And I can use a great example, 1999. So really the 90s, right? When I was first getting in the business, anybody who retired almost any time in that decade had a pretty darn good run. So you rolled your money out of your employer's plan, you put it somewhere, you invested it. If you were taking anywhere in the 5%, 4% range, almost everyone across the board really was having a much higher balance because the market just went on a tear. In contrast, somebody who retired just a year later in the early part of 2000 had a much different ride because we had 3 down years in the market. And so they're, let's just say $1 million they started out of the gate with, and they got hit with a down market in those first 3 years, and plus their withdrawal, right? So immediately in their 3rd, 4th year, they're off of where they thought their path was on that plan. So to your point, had they taken the time to sit and maybe look after that first negative year and said, oh, maybe I need to make a small adjustment here, that would have saved them having to look at it in years 3 or 4 and then go, oh, I have to make a major adjustments, because little things are easy. Bigger things take time and take almost a lifestyle change, right? And so I couldn't agree more with you on that dynamic adjustment as you go. And the only way to really know how much, or if you have to adjust at all, is to really look at the numbers.
Exactly. And I think that's a good example of being conservative too. And I'm sure you've gotten clients that have come in saying the same thing too. We usually will plan for age 85, maybe up to age 90, and people will come in and say, well, I just want to plan to age 75 because that's how long I want my assets to last for. And in order to do that, you have to create a plan that kind of goes straight. It's not conservative. It's the opposite of conservative. It's aggressive. Yeah. And, you might be having like a 7 or 8% withdrawal rate instead of that 4% to kind of run out of money. But then if you hit something like the early 2000s right out the gate, and all of a sudden markets are down for 3 years, plus you're taking 7, 8%, I mean, you're not really looking at 15, 20 years of having your assets last anymore. You might be looking at 10 or less. So, trying to be conservative on the front end is a good example of that too. Yeah.
And for those folks that don't really love when you say be conservative in the beginning, which I agree with 100%, I have had clients that do want to get, I'm probably overusing the word dynamic here today, but they do want to take a look at it, and they say, hey, look, I want to retire, let's say at age 60, and I know that my spouse and we're going to go for 10 years. We're going to try to do that bucket list thing. There's so many places we've been working with our head down. We haven't been able to have time to go there. The kids have been distracting too. And now this is our little window and we want to travel. So instead of just saying, I'm just going to take X percentage off, they front load that retirement so that they can make those trips and everything. And then they underweight the tail end of that. Now, there's pros and cons to that, and health is everything. Health is really king as much as money, if not more. So we'll see how that gets dictated and how you have to make some adjustments. But I think that's an interesting thing. So some people say, I don't want to start. My father lived to his 83rd year, and he never thought he was going to make it past 65. And he, my dad, I probably shouldn't get into the details, but he wasn't a master of money. Like everybody knows that. Maybe that's why I paid so much attention. My mom and I figuring out how to do things. But I have a lot of clients that fit that bill. I won't live that long, and next thing you know, they're in 10 years past where they thought they were getting, like, they want to make sure they don't run out of money. So that's the last thing you want to do is have to go back to your kids to borrow money or go to the bank to live on.
Yeah, and I have a good amount of clients in that same boat too that want to front end the spending, and I guess that it's good that you're clearing that up as far as being conservative in the beginning. I don't really mean spending less on the front end. I just mean putting together a full plan that's conservative. And you could even spend more on the front end and less in the long run and still have kind of a more, what I'm considering a conservative plan. When I say conservative plan, I just mean a plan that either stays flat or goes up, gives you some kind of flexibility for those curveballs life throws you.
Yeah.
You know?
No one should take my front loading idea as a way of like, hey, that's nice, Mike. I'm just going to spend wildly, I'm just saying in the cases I've worked, we've baked in exactly what they think they want to spend. And they basically want to have a budget for extra travel on the front end, right? But that budget, to your point, is baked into the whole plan. So if one year they decide, you know what, we're busy, we don't have time to travel, they're actually ahead of their plan because they didn't spend that money. It's still sitting in their accounts. And maybe they can go a little more next year or whatever. But I think it's important to understand, to my earlier example of the folks who retired in the 90s versus somebody in the 2000s, early 2000s, the sequencing of what the markets do, what your investments do, and based on against when you retire. If the beginning years are lean and your returns, it makes your retirement a little bit different. So that's important. So I don't want to beat that. I don't want to get into too graphic of my sayings, but you know what I'm saying. What else aren't we covering here? We're covering a lot.
I guess just the last bullet point we had was the 4% rule.
Right.
If I were to just leave kind of everything we just said and kind of sum it up, 4% is definitely a safe amount to take out of your account per year. But just be cognizant of everything else. I don't mean to overcomplicate it, but you also really don't want to oversimplify your retirement plan either at the cost of, running out of money at some point. I do think it's a good idea to sit down, really have a good conversation with yourself or with your spouse or whoever it is of what's everything you have going on in the next 30 years. What are your goals? Who do you want to leave money? How much do you want to leave of that money to them? And just get all those different variables written down and then try to decide on what a good distribution rate is, because it might be 4%, it might be 5%, it might be 2%. It really depends on person to person. It's just so different.
Yeah. I think that's perfect. Sage advice from not that old of a guy, but you're a smart guy for a 32,
32, yeah.
32, yeah. Okay. Well, that is great advice. And I know that I'll emphasize again, your planning. We're all in the office working, and I know you do a lot of plans for folks, and it keeps it. I'm a visual person, and I think people just like to see it, whether it's on paper, on the screen, up on the TV, just to see where they are, kind of puts it in perspective for them. And also validates when you say, hey, let's, be a little more conservative, or, hey, we've had a couple of good years, you can do those things that we talked about. So flexibility is king, and you help people with that. So I appreciate that. I love working alongside you every day. Anything else? Any last parting words? That's all. I guess I'll give us one little shameless plug here. It is a good idea if you are thinking about coming up with a distribution rate to talk to a planner. Yep. It's free to get consultations, whether it's myself, someone from the office, even somebody from a different firm, if that's the direction you want to go in. No way, it has to be right here. Just talk to somebody, because there really are a lot of variables that we're pretty used to seeing, and we know those things to look forward to. Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate your time, and I'm sure you want to get back. I think you have a meeting right after this. So. I do. All right, man. Thanks, you so much.